Now, the Bakers Union was not just one of the founders, but arguably the founder of today's Labour Party that Roger Waters was just talking about. It's important, therefore, to note that the Bakers Union has now left the building. The Bakers Union has left the Labour Party. It has disaffiliated from the Labour Party. And if you don't want to know the reason why, then you're a fool. If you're a Labour Party member and you don't want to know why one of the party's original pillars can no longer stomach it, or if you are someone who just believes, like me, that every country needs an opposition if it is to be called a democracy, and the opposition isn't functioning as Keir Starmer's Labour surely isn't the only party ever to finish its conference and go down in the opinion polls, then I think you are being very foolish. Ian Hodson is the national president of the Bakers Union. Its Sunday name is the BFAWU. And Ian joins us now. Ian, thanks very much. It's not every day you get to follow Roger Waters onto the stage, but he was your warm-up act. You're the main attraction. Tell us the opposite of what first attracted you to the Labour Party. Tell us that. Why were the Bakers foundational in the Labour Party?
Well, first off, following Roger Waters, nobody can do that, mate. We founded the Labour Party because we believed that the Labour classes needed the voice in Parliament to change the system that didn't work for us. I mean, I've been doing a lot of research recently, and John Jenkins, who was our then General Secretary, talks about, the big two powerful political parties, which were the Tories and the Liberals. And in 1902, his words were that the Liberal Party believed that working people shouldn't go anywhere else, and they didn't have anywhere else to go to. The Liberal Party had three factions in it. It had a leadership that was going in the opposite direction from what people desired and what they needed. And the Labour Party offered the best opportunity for our class to have a representation in Parliament that would ensure that working people got an opportunity to change their lives. That's what the Labour Party was created for. It was to bring about real change, real opportunity. It was about equality, ending poverty. Because there was also in the background of when we were setting up the Labour Party, you had King Edward VII feeding 500,000 people in London that were too poor to eat. And yet here we are in 2021 needing a footballer to do it, George.
Yes, so nearly 120 years later, you've decided that the Labour Party is not the vehicle for the defence of working people and the voice of working people in Parliament and in the political system. What led you to that conclusion?
So we ran a survey of our members earlier in the year, and it was quite clear that the majority of our membership didn't think that the Labour Party was going in the right direction. They didn't believe that the Labour Party was going to change the system to make it better for them. Obviously, recent events have made our membership quite upset. I mean, in 2016, first off, they suspended our General Secretary. And then more recently, they threatened to auto-expel me for actually the organisation that I was with, or they accused me of being a sponsor of, which I wasn't a sponsor of, was set up to demand that if people were being suspended from the Labour Party, they had a right to know, they had a right to a fair hearing, they had a right to a representation, and obviously there was a due process that they would be aware of which at the time, in 2017 wasn't the case at all.
So these are what are described colloquially or popularly as the witch hunting of the supporters of the former leader, Jeremy Corbyn, who is himself witch hunted now, is no longer a Labour MP. So the ex-leader of the Labour Party just a couple of years ago and the union that set the Labour Party up nearly 120 years ago are now both outside of Labour. What does that tell us?
Well, it tells us a lot. I mean, obviously, obviously, our relationship with Labour goes back even further than that. I mean, we was addressed as an organisation when we was, in our previous name as the Operative Bakers. We were taking joint action with the Jewish bakers in the East End of London, and we was actually addressed by Keir Hardie in 1893. Wow. Which obviously led to probably our relationship with the Labour Party and why we felt so strongly about setting it up. I mean, because today's like this. I mean, we've just seen in the last week that the idea that people go to a Labour Party conference, pass motions, and then for the shadow ministers to come out and say, well, now is not the time, or they're not going to honour those things. Is incredibly poor. I mean, I took part in the Chulo meeting on the Friday before the conference started, where we had a consensus of opinion about the real changes, for example, but they paid no attention to the fact that trade unions have particular structures which we have to, follow internally, and they decided to ride a horse and carriages through union structures. So quite clearly, in their opinion, they don't care about the trade union movement. And one of the things that came over loud and clear at the recall conference that we held was that people thought that conference was awful. They thought that the Labour Party conference, displayed a view that was going backwards, that it wasn't going to raise the opportunities and improve the lives of the people that we represent. In fact, people thought it was very hypocritical, for example, that Keir Starmer in 2019 came and attended and supported our call for £15 an hour when our members were on strike. But it was more than just a strike for McDonald's workers at that particular time. It was part of a new campaign, which was launched by the CWU, which we took part in, which was called a New Deal for Workers, and to deliver £15 an hour. And yet here he is, basically forcing his employment minister, who produced the best document of the Labour Party, to resign. After he told us at that meeting on Friday that they were open on the issue of £10 an hour. And quite clearly they weren't. I mean, if they haven't got the aspirations just for making sure that workers get, paid a wage they can afford to live on, I mean, what does that say about today's Labour Party?
Indeed. So what next for the Bakers Union, this historic organisation, which is not in the museum, as you say? You were the ones outside McDonald's with the banner demanding £15 that Keir Starmer, in a photo opportunity, took part in. So you're still at the cutting edge, trying to organise workers in your sector. What's next for you politically?
So, I mean, obviously, we're going to do more politics. Leaving the Labour Party doesn't mean that we stop doing politics. What it means is that, instead of wasting our money on the Labour Party, we're going to invest that into setting up in communities. So what we will be doing is we'll be setting up in community centres. We will be giving free advice and guidance to people who are struggling. We'll be working with organisations to give advice on rents. We'll be working with the Zero Hours Justice campaign. And we will be making sure that, Westminster has been for years seen as, the opportunity to change people's lives. But what it's proved, certainly in the last 40 years, Westminster has been responsible for devastating people's lives. We saw that with the miners' strike. We've seen that, for decades where the politicians have basically voted through insecure employment. Low pay has become the norm and become acceptable. and they keep rolling out these people to defend the society that we're having to live in. So Westminster isn't going to change our lives. It's us that's going to do that. And the Bakers Union is going to play a key role in making sure that we educate people in the workforce and educate people in our communities to build a better world by making sure that we understand it's through our solidarity that things will change, as it's always been through our history.
Well, very briefly, Ian, the Labour Party must have been deeply wounded by your departure. Have they been on the phone crying?
They absolutely haven't. I mean, that was another thing that obviously disappointed, our delegates, was the fact that we tried to set up meetings with them since June, and they committed to meetings, but then they failed to arrange those meetings. And basically, the only correspondence we've had with them since June was my letter of auto expulsion. We did meet with Annalise Dodds. We did meet with Angela Rayner. We did put a proposal on the table to them to try and avoid the need to disaffiliate. We gave them until 1 o'clock on Tuesday, and their response was deafening.
Well, in my opinion, it's not the opinion of the show or the station. You're well rid of them, I must say. Ian Hodson of the Bakers Union, I take my hat off to you. Many a baker's dozen of successors to you in the next period.